case about whether you think the birth was real, whether you think there was a surrogate, whether you think Meghan was wearing a moon bump. The fact is, Harry and Meghan lied. Buckingham Palace lied on their behalf. There was a complete cover-up over the birth of Prince Archie.
Imagine if one of the most famous royal births in modern history wasn't as simple as the world was told. For years, the public saw the arrival of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's son Archie as a joyful royal milestone. Cameras flashed, headlines celebrated, and the story seemed clear. A young couple welcoming their first child while stepping into a new chapter of independence. But behind the polished headlines and smiling photos, critics claim there may be a much stranger story hiding in the background. Some believe the narrative everyone heard might have left out key details, and now those lingering questions are starting to resurface in a big way. The debate has recently gained attention again because several public commentators, including Candace Owens, have started pointing out what they describe as confusing parts of Meghan's pregnancy timeline. According to them, certain details from interviews, public statements, and Prince Harry's own memoir don't seem to match perfectly. They argue that when you place all the pieces side by side, the timeline begins to look far more complicated than the neat version originally presented. Royal watchers who follow every detail say the discussion has sparked a wave of curiosity, with people digging through past reports, statements, and medical assumptions to see whether everything truly lines up. One of the details that immediately grabbed attention involves Harry's description of the birth itself.
Why lie? It was just so truly bizarre.
That belly looks very abnormal. That it looks very strange. If you look up close in the video, and I encourage people, look at this. It looks like there's like a bag or like some sort of something shoved up under a dress. It does not look like a pregnant belly. It looks all bumpy. It's very strange. It looks like what you'd get if you put like a pillowcase full of like socks or something.
In his memoir, he explains that Archie was born at the private Portland Hospital in London. On the surface, that sounds exactly like the type of exclusive setting many would expect for a royal delivery. But critics say the timeline described around the birth includes a few moments that seem unusual to them. The story mentions Meghan receiving 2 epidurals during labour, followed by leaving the hospital with Archie only a short time later. At first glance, the account might sound straightforward, but once medical professionals and experienced parents began looking at the details, some said the situation raised a few questions. An epidural, which is used to reduce pain during labour, involves placing a catheter near the spine to deliver medication. Because of how the procedure works, replacing or switching epidurals during labour is generally done with caution and careful monitoring. Some medical voices have pointed out that while adjustments can happen, the idea of having 2 separate epidurals during the same labour is considered uncommon in typical situations. Then there's the timeline described after the birth, which critics say makes the situation sound even more unusual.
She has convinced Harry that she is Princess Diana, except this time he has an opportunity to save her. That is the truth. And it's worked, right? So she's done this convincing performance for Harry that I don't know how I ended here. I just love you. And I'm just like your mom. And the one chance that you had to save your mom again, when he recounts that tale and the things that she said, she threatened homicide on her unborn child and suicide on herself. And then she convinced Harry that it was his idea to leave the UK.
If he can't see the writing on the wall that she is trying to embody his mother, even when he told a story about how she said she was going to commit suicide while she was pregnant and that she was having suicidal thoughts. And you can see in everything that she does, she tries to put this pressure on him of like, well, look what happened to your mom. Like that could happen to me unless we do exactly what I want, which is to move back to Los Angeles and to be the A-list actress that I never was and to be in those circles. And I think that she's manipulated him using the death of his mother, which is so creepy and so scary. And I think that he's got some weird maternal syndrome with her and that he thinks that he can somehow save his mother by doing everything and making sure that Meghan is happy.
Hospitals often keep new mothers under observation for many hours after delivery, especially if strong pain relief methods were used. In many cases, that monitoring period can last much of the day or even overnight. But according to Harry's account, Meghan was back at Frogmore Cottage resting with baby Archie not long after leaving the hospital. That detail made some observers pause and wonder how quickly everything moved. The travel distance also became part of the discussion. Portland Hospital is located in central London, while Frogmore Cottage sits several miles away near Windsor. Anyone familiar with London traffic knows that travelling between those locations isn't always quick or simple. When you combine the drive with hospital discharge paperwork, newborn checkups, and recovery time, critics say the schedule begins to feel very tight. Even under ideal conditions, the timeline appears extremely fast to some people who have examined the story closely. Because of those details, a number of commentators have started asking the same question again and again. Why does the timeline feel different from what many people expect during a typical hospital birth? For critics, that single question opened the door to even more curiosity. If one part of the story seems confusing, they wonder whether other pieces of the narrative deserve a closer look as well. But the discussion didn't stop with the medical timeline. The way Archie's birth was announced to the public also added another layer to the debate. Royal births have followed a traditional announcement process for decades. Normally, the monarch is informed first. Then an official notice is placed outside Buckingham Palace, followed by confirmation for the media so the public can celebrate the news together. It's a system that has remained mostly unchanged for generations. When Archie arrived, however, that familiar routine looked noticeably different. Instead of the usual immediate updates, the information reached the public in a more controlled and delayed way. Meghan later gave several explanations about why the press was not involved in the traditional manner. In one account, she explained it as a decision to protect her privacy. In another version, she referenced complications connected to the birth itself. Later comments seemed to frame the situation slightly differently again. Those changing explanations left many observers puzzled and trying to understand what really happened behind the scenes. Royal reporters who normally stay close to palace messaging admitted that the sequence of events surrounding Archie's birth caught them off guard. As more people revisited the timeline, the same lingering question kept returning. Was the situation simply misunderstood, or were there details the public never fully heard about in the first place? Then the timeline around Archie's birth started getting even more confusing. Some journalists later said they were informed that Archie had already been born hours earlier, while other reporters were still receiving updates suggesting Meghan was in labour at that same time. That contradiction immediately caught attention. To critics watching the situation unfold, it looked like two completely different stories were being told at once. This wasn't just a minor mix-up either. The British royal household is known for running on extremely tight communication rules. Every announcement normally goes through careful planning. Every statement is double-checked and every update follows a clear protocol. Because of that reputation for precision, the confusion surrounding Archie's birth announcement surprised a lot of observers who expected everything to run like clockwork. Instead of clarity, the public saw mixed signals and shifting explanations. And the more those details were discussed, the more speculation started spreading online. Some commentators began asking a bold question. Was the confusion simply the result of messy coordination? Or could the chaos have been covering up something more complicated about the birth itself? For critics who already questioned parts of the timeline, the media confusion only added fuel to the discussion. If the communication around the event seemed disorganized, they wondered whether the deeper story might also include details that were never fully explained to the public. And once attention shifted back to Portland Hospital, the debate only grew louder. So the question many people started asking was simple but provocative. Were the inconsistencies really about protecting privacy and keeping media pressure away from a new mother? Was it an attempt to control the narrative or avoid overwhelming attention? Or was there something else happening quietly behind palace walls that the public never saw?
I can't stand the inauthenticity. It has to stop. I tried with you, Meghan, really. You got to pick a lane. You got to stay in it, okay? That's all I'm saying.
One part of the story that sparked intense discussion involved Harry's statement that Meghan supposedly received 2 epidurals during labour. For medical professionals, that detail immediately stood out. An epidural isn't a quick injection you receive and then forget about. It's a precise medical procedure where doctors carefully place a catheter near the spine so medication can provide steady pain relief during labour. Once that catheter is inserted, doctors normally leave it in place and adjust the medication if needed. In most situations, there's no reason to remove it and repeat the entire procedure again. Because of that, some medical experts said the claim of 2 epidurals during the same labour raised questions about how the situation unfolded. Replacing the catheter during labor can happen, but doctors usually treat that step very cautiously. It's considered uncommon and is often linked to situations where the original placement didn't work properly or complications required extra monitoring. When that occurs, medical teams typically observe the patient closely afterward to make sure everything remains stable. But in Harry's description, critics say the moment is mentioned almost casually, as if it were just another routine step in the delivery process. That difference in tone caught the attention of commentators, who began debating whether the account sounded medically realistic. For them, the story began to feel less like a typical hospital scenario and more like a dramatic retelling of events. And the timeline becomes even more surprising when critics focus on what supposedly happened next. If Meghan truly underwent such an involved medical procedure, many observers say her reported recovery speed sounds incredibly fast. According to Harry's version, the couple left Portland Hospital and returned home with baby Archie not long afterward. For many medical professionals, that detail raised additional questions. After procedures involving epidurals, hospitals usually keep patients under observation for a significant amount of time. Doctors and nurses monitor blood pressure, nerve responses, and possible side effects before clearing someone to leave. That careful monitoring helps prevent complications and ensures both mother and baby are stable. Because of that, some observers argue the idea of multiple epidurals followed by a same-day departure sounds difficult to imagine within normal hospital routines. From their perspective, the timeline seems to move unusually quickly compared with what many families experience during childbirth in a hospital setting. And that leads to a bigger question that keeps resurfacing.
I have tremendous compassion for any person that is in an emotionally abusive relationship, so emotionally abusive that they have successfully isolated you from your entire family. It's not normal. There is no relationship that you should be in that should isolate you from your entire.
Was the timeline simply misunderstood or described loosely in the memoir? Or was the story presented in a way that made the events sound more dramatic than they actually were? With Meghan's pregnancy story, critics say even small details seem to open the door to larger mysteries. Childbirth is rarely something people walk away from within just a few hours, regardless of status or access to private care. In most hospitals, new mothers remain under observation for many hours after delivery, so medical teams can confirm that recovery is progressing safely. During that time, doctors regularly check vital signs, monitor bleeding, and examine the newborn several times before discharge is even considered. If complications are involved, hospitals are usually even more careful. Medical staff often extend observation periods to ensure everything remains stable before allowing a patient to leave. At one point, Meghan publicly referenced a medical condition connected to pregnancy that hospitals take very seriously. That condition requires close monitoring because it can lead to serious health concerns if not handled carefully. Patients dealing with it are often kept under supervision for extended periods to protect both mother and baby. Yet in Harry's memoir, critics say the story reads very differently. The sequence appears almost unbelievably fast, as if Meghan gave birth, went through medical treatment, and returned home within the span of just a few hours. Some observers compared it to the length of watching a single movie. For medical professionals who examined the claims, that version of events sounded unusual. A few experts who commented publicly described the timeline as unlikely when compared with typical hospital procedures. That reaction only pushed the debate even further into the spotlight. The situation also draws attention because Meghan has frequently spoken about maternal health and the importance of proper care for mothers after childbirth. She has used her platform to highlight how critical medical monitoring and support are during recovery. Because of that advocacy, critics say the details surrounding Archie's birth have continued to spark discussion.
So she's saying, you need proof that I'm authentic? I just dropped myself twerking. Obviously, I'm authentic. So she's bringing that up to say there is now PR. I have proven that I am authentic because I twerked with my husband in a room. That's not a normal way to answer the question. If somebody asked me about my authenticity, I would say I don't need to justify that I authentically am who I am. But camera, fixate it, and then both of you start twerking. Because in her mind, she was thinking, I'm going to release this later in a Netflix doc or release it later to show people how relatable I am. Otherwise, you can have a cute moment with your husband without recording it. Like, why would you record this for any reason? Why would you record this in the hospital?
Meghan has repeatedly emphasized that mothers deserve strong medical support and careful monitoring after delivery. But skeptics argue that if the story about leaving the hospital so quickly is accurate, it would seem very different from the standards she often encourages publicly. And that contrast is exactly why the debate surrounding Archie's birth still hasn't fully faded away. And if that timeline turns out to be off even slightly, it opens the door to another possibility entirely. It could mean the public was presented with a polished version of events that doesn't fully reflect what actually happened behind the scenes. That idea alone is enough to keep people asking questions. Because the more the story is examined, the more uncertain some details begin to look. Those questions only grew louder once reports from behind the scenes started circulating. Far from the official palace statements and carefully arranged photo moments, whispers reportedly began coming from people connected to Portland Hospital. None of these claims were presented publicly with names attached, but the chatter was enough to spark curiosity among royal watchers who follow every tiny detail. According to a few anonymous sources who were reportedly familiar with the hospital at the time, certain parts of the story didn't seem to match their recollections. One staff member even joked about Prince Harry's story involving late-night food runs. While Portland Hospital is known for providing high-quality meals and comfortable service, insiders pointed out that patients typically can't order elaborate dishes at any random hour of the night. Of course, the hospital does have a reputation for luxury and privacy. It's a place where many high-profile patients go, specifically for discretion and comfort. But critics claim the story about midnight cravings and special food requests didn't fully line up with what some staff members remembered being available during overnight hours. Another detail that sparked debate comes directly from Harry's memoir. In the book, he describes using what he called a secret elevator while leaving the hospital. The description sounded dramatic and cinematic, almost like something from a movie scene. But according to people who say they've worked in the building for years, Portland Hospital doesn't actually have a hidden elevator system like the one described.
Meghan is a trained actress. What she does is that she studies people. She's not a good actress, but she is a trained one, right? She's been doing it her entire life. And there is no doubt that she studied Princess Diana. She studied her mannerisms towards Harry when he was a boy and the way that she grabs her face. And this is the psychopathic elements of what she does, putting a pregnancy text next to Princess Diana's hair, saying that she put her hands on the grave to have a conversation with her, bursting into tears. And she has convinced there's a thing called in psychology called the Freudian transfer.
Longtime staff members say the facility absolutely prioritizes privacy, with controlled hallways, restricted areas, and security measures designed to protect patients from public attention. But insiders claim there's nothing resembling a hidden escape route or secret lift specifically built for royal departures. For critics, that difference between the memoir's description and the hospital's layout added another layer of confusion. Individually, these details might seem small or easy to dismiss, but critics argue that when you stack them together, the situation begins to look far more complicated than a simple birth story. Little inconsistencies about food, elevators, timelines, and medical procedures start forming a much bigger picture that some observers find difficult to ignore. To certain commentators, the entire narrative begins to feel less like a straightforward recollection and more like a version of events carefully shaped for public presentation. When you add the whispers from hospital insiders, who reportedly claim Meghan's stay was quieter and less dramatic than later headlines suggested, the official timeline begins to look less solid in the eyes of skeptics. Candace Owens became one of the most outspoken voices discussing these contradictions. She argued that when smaller details in a story begin falling apart, it's natural for people to start questioning the larger narrative surrounding it. In her view, the inconsistencies raise the possibility that the situation may have been exaggerated or framed in a certain way. Some critics have gone even further with their theories. They suggest that the entire situation may have involved carefully managing every piece of the story, from the hospital experience itself to how the events were later described to the public.
I think she was about 7 months pregnant, and this is when they were still within the royal family. And she said, I was going to kill myself, but I didn't do it because I didn't want you to suffer the same thing that you suffered with your mom. She actually came out and said that.
Doesn't make you sound like a better mom. It makes you sound like really kind of into yourself in a way.
According to this perspective, shaping the narrative might have been a way to maintain control over how Meghan and Harry were perceived during a time of intense media attention. As one commentator put it, Meghan sometimes appears caught between two very different worlds. On one side, she's a former actress who understands how public storytelling works. On the other side, she stepped into the rigid traditions of royal life, where every move is watched and analysed. That combination, critics say, can make the line between personal experience and public narrative feel complicated. Whatever the full truth may be, each new claim, leak, or contradiction seems to push public opinion further away from certainty and closer to speculation. And with every new discussion, the same massive question continues hanging over the entire story. Why were there inconsistencies in the first place? That's the point critics keep returning to again and again. Why would Harry's memoir include details like 2 epidurals and such a rapid hospital departure? Were those simply innocent memory errors, small exaggerations meant to make the story more dramatic, or something more intentional? At this stage, critics say the contradictions aren't just scattered observations anymore. They've become questions that many people want explained. If the timeline seems difficult to reconcile, if certain hospital details don't appear to match reality, and if individuals connected to the situation recall events differently, then the public is left staring at a mystery. Why would Meghan and Harry reshape or polish something as deeply personal as the birth of their own child? Some observers believe the answer could simply be control. In the royal environment, where privacy is extremely difficult to maintain, controlling the narrative might have been the only way to protect personal boundaries. When every moment of life becomes global news, shaping the story might feel like the only way to keep a little breathing room. Others interpret the situation very differently. They believe the story may have been framed in a way that encouraged sympathy for Meghan, highlighting the enormous pressure she faced from media scrutiny and public criticism during that time. But another group of commentators offers a completely separate theory. They believe the secrecy might not have been about Meghan personally at all, but about protecting the monarchy from uncomfortable headlines or awkward questions that could have created controversy. Whatever the true motivation may have been, one thing is certain. The unanswered details surrounding Archie's birth created a reaction that still divides opinions today. Instead of silencing critics, each new claim seemed to give skeptics more reasons to examine the story even closer. Every shifting detail, every unclear timeline, and every conflicting recollection made the situation feel more unstable in the public conversation. And once trust starts to weaken, rebuilding it can be incredibly difficult. Candace Owens stepped right into that growing wave of doubt, transforming quiet whispers into a loud public debate. She argued that when a royal couple struggles to clearly explain something as significant as a birth story, people naturally begin wondering what other parts of the narrative might still be hidden from view.
And here's what Meghan Markle says.
You have to be authentic.
Let's be authentic. Did you see my baby mama dance?
I mean, stop it. First of all, can I just tell you the timing of that? We maybe watched it like 20 times yesterday. And I was like,
okay.
Whether the situation was simply messy storytelling or a narrative carefully polished for the public, one thing is clear: the conversation around it has shifted towards serious skepticism. What once sounded like a straightforward royal birth story is now surrounded by debates, questions, and theories that refuse to fade away. And that brings us to the big question hovering over everything. What do these contradictions mean for Meghan and Harry's credibility moving forward? From confusing memoir details to debates about hospital procedures, Archie's birth story has become wrapped in claims that critics say don't fully line up. Some believe it was nothing more than mixed up memories or storytelling that sounded more dramatic than the reality. Others believe the narrative may have been shaped in a way that presented the situation more smoothly for public attention. Either way, the complete picture still feels slightly out of reach for many people following the story. One thing seems certain, though. The full truth still feels buried beneath layers of confusion, privacy, and carefully managed royal messaging. Candace Owens helped push the discussion into the spotlight, but supporters of the debate say she only amplified questions that had already been circulating quietly for years. Critics argue the details don't align perfectly, and the timeline sometimes looks like puzzle pieces that refuse to lock together. Every new explanation seems to spark even more curiosity instead of settling the mystery. But here's where things get even more interesting. Some commentators believe this might not be the only part of Meghan's story that has raised eyebrows. Behind the glamorous photos, polished interviews, and carefully managed public image, critics say there appears to be a growing list of moments that people keep revisiting whenever new information surfaces. Some observers dismiss it all as coincidence or simple misunderstandings. Others believe it could reflect a pattern of narrative control. Either way, the discussion keeps resurfacing again and again. For skeptics, the situation doesn't just feel unclear, it feels tightly managed. And that has led some people to wonder whether other royal stories could eventually face the same level of scrutiny. And if the pregnancy timeline debate already seemed dramatic, there's another controversy that keeps popping up in online discussions: Meghan's so-called age controversy. Yes, that topic has stirred attention too. Meghan's half-sister, Samantha Markle, has made several public claims over the years that some commentators believe could reshape how certain parts of Meghan's past are viewed. The relationship between the sisters has long been strained, and Samantha's comments have only added more tension and headlines to the situation. Her statements have triggered new conversations online, with people debating whether the claims hold any weight or if they are simply part of a long-running family dispute. Either way, the discussion has added yet another layer of intrigue to the wider story surrounding Meghan. If you want a deeper breakdown of the so-called age controversy and exactly what Samantha Markle has said, drop a comment below. That topic has its own twists and debates that many people find just as surprising. No matter where the truth eventually lands, one thing is clear: this entire saga continues to keep people guessing. The more people revisit the details, the more it feels like we might still be seeing only part of the bigger picture. So now the question turns to you. Do you think this whole situation was simply a misunderstanding that grew bigger than it should have? Or do you believe parts of the story may have been carefully shaped behind the scenes? Was the royal couple simply trying to protect their privacy in an intense media spotlight? Or were they managing the narrative to present the most polished version of events possible? Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves royal mysteries. And most importantly, drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this debate is far from over.